Glasgow, find RR365, and you will find us with this live program, Islamicate Conversations, isyllabus.org. We are on Facebook Live. Also, end of this program, you can catch up on this program on our YouTube channel on RR365, Radio Ramadan 365, and also on our Facebook page, rr365again.co.uk. Islamic Conversation with your host Zubair Akram and with my guest Sheikh Ridwan Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. أهلا وسهلا Joe.
MashaAllah. So this is actually just past midnight here in Lahore, 8 o'clock in Glasgow, and 10 p.m. in Istanbul. Sheikh, today, inshallah, as we left last time with the viewers and listeners, that inshallah we'll be covering what we almost stopped last time. That was, so there is a bill, a private bill by one of the lawmakers of Pakistani Parliament, Prohibition of Forced Conversion Act 2021. And the draft highlights that the application will have to include the name. So basically it says there is this phenomena where, especially in the province of Sindh, there are a lot of young men and women forced to change, especially females, forced to change their religion because people want to either get married to them or they force them into working into their establishments, and they're better off becoming Muslims. So hence there is a law. So that's a background to it. So there is a proposed law that no one can change their religion until they are the age of 18, and then they will have to apply for it. They will be called to the magistrate's office or the lower court. Then they will have to prove that they've actually read enough about Islam and they're convinced that this is the faith they want to pursue. And then the judge will give them a cooling off period, as you can call it, of 90 days. And if they're still steadfast in their understanding of changing their faith, then state will officially recognize. So this is a proposed law, and there's a lot of hue and cry about it, especially from the religious quarters, that this is something which is against the teachings of Islam. If someone wants to become a Muslim, and the example that quoted of Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu, that he accepted Islam at a very young age, and Hazrat Aisha herself, and others, that where the precedent says that there is no age restriction in conversion. So this is one of the hot conversations going on in Pakistani media, on Twitter, hashtags, conversion of Islam. So the faith that which we follow, theology, where does it stand about it?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So this, so you kind of touched upon this question last week, right at the end, I think. Yeah. And I kind of got a kind of feel for what the problem was, and I think we kind of touched upon it quickly. But it's such a generic issue in the Muslim world, because it's not just restricted to what we're talking about, which you're talking about, which is a bill that's being passed to outlaw the conversion of a person until they reach a specific age. So this, why that's happening, you've just kind of explained some of the background to it, which is forced conversions or marriage due to, conversion due to marriage or whatever it is. These are kind of the backdrop stories to it, which kind of lead to somebody saying, well, we need to have some kind of system in place. But what I think is interesting here is just to understand apostasy from the context that's slightly different. The context I think we should be looking at it is from the context of how Muslims view it, and you're talking about religious communities and religious scholars in that country, in the country you're in at this moment in time, creating a hue and cry about it, saying that it goes against Islamic principles. And you mentioned a couple of precedents which, on the face of it seem to make perfect sense, that Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu was the first, said the first child to have become Muslim, so the Prophet accepted his faith. In other words, it's possible and probable, all things being equal, that a child can enter into some kind of conversion into Islam. And in fact, I know in Glasgow there was a young boy, young man, you would say, I think 13 or 14, who became Muslim right behind where I live in the school. He used to go to the school just behind where I live. And I came to know him, and he started attending classes and things. Now, he was under the age of, I think he was well under the age of what you're talking about. I think he was 14. And he became Muslim, and his mother knew about it, and she was supportive of him. So I think the discussion has to be separated from what we all agree and nobody would disagree, which is, all things being equal, a child at the age at which they have some sort of responsibility, not complete legal responsibility. In different countries they have legal responsibility for different things, such as driving cars and going to war and getting married at different ages. There is a certain maturity, intellectual maturity, or ability to make decisions which they can make, which does not impact anybody else, that everybody should accept. And one of those things would be faith, general faith, that they testify and believe that something is true. But that is not the question. I'm surprised that, and I'm not surprised, I'm saying surprised, but I'm kind of slightly taken aback by the fact that the precedence of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu or Sayyidah Aisha coming to the fold of Islam at such a young age is the only proof that we have in such a context. That's not the case. The situation is that there's extraneous issues here at play, which is the forced, and the whole point is, it's well catalogued. In fact, I looked at this. It's well catalogued that there are cases where people are coerced and forced into accepting a faith. And that's why last week, when we were just touching upon this, something came to my mind, which was, and I'll mention it again today, which is, there was a student, one of the students at syllabus, he asked me a question about 𝐉𝐨𝐢𝐧 𝐙 who, as you know, is one of the most famous translators of the Quran, one of the first and earliest translators of the Quran. At the age of around 19, he was in Damascus and in the Umayyad mosque studying Islam. And he himself says that at that age he approached who he calls and labeled Sheikh al-Ulama, and proposed to him that he wanted to become Muslim. And the Sheikh in the Umayyad mosque, and you have to take this on the face value of 𝐉𝐨𝐢𝐧 𝐙 himself saying this, said, not until you've consulted your parents. This is the age of 19. So not until you consult with your parents. And he gave a reason for that. He says, because many people, he said, from our nations, our sons are in your countries, and this is in 1890 roughly. He says many of our sons are in your countries, and we would only want that they consult their parents before making a change to Christianity. So therefore, the same here. And so nobody's arguing with the fact that a person of that age of 13, 14 should be able to confess Islam. Now, the only issue you have here is that complicates it is mitigating circumstances, which is the forced conversion. And that, I believe, the religious community do have to give that some sort of thought. Because remember, the whole idea of apostasy laws, Muslim scholars, I believe, generally are fixated about this issue, because they don't look at it, even though they prove it and look at it from the perspective, on the face of it, of hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, for example, or the books of fiqh, for example, that have chapters on this, Kitab al-Ridda. But they look at it now, and I'm certain of this, having spoken to lots of them over the years, is that they see it as an extension of what Sheikh Saeed Ramadan Bhuti, rahimahullah, used to refer to as al-ghazw al-fikri. Al-ghazw al-fikri is like this intellectual attack upon the ummah. And one aspect of that colonialized or colonialist mentality from the West towards Muslim is to convert their sons and daughters. And so when Muslim scholars and Muslim populations look at this, yes, they're going to quote a hadith. Yes, they're going to tell us that Sayyidina Ali became Muslim at a certain age. But at the forefront of it is this reaction to this mindset, is that they're taking away our right to decide what we can do. And more than that, they're telling us who can become Muslim, who cannot. And it's an extension of what? It's an extension of colonialism. And so I think that is very, very important. I mean, if you don't put it into that context, this discussion will all just be about, the number of 2 or 3 hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. One very clear hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari related by Ikrimah on the authority of his teacher Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhu, in which the Prophet ﷺ said that man baddala dinahu faqtuluhu, whoever changes their religion, then you should sentence them to death. That hadith is in Sahih Bukhari, so from one aspect it is Sahih, but the discussion is not simply at this point on the hadith. I think the political and the ideological undertones of this discussion are far more important, because people feel an affront. People, especially religious communities or leadership in Muslim countries, feel that this is the latest stage in the colonialist mentality. And also, the whole idea of apostasy, I think, in the Muslim world, from Christianity, and specifically when missionaries went to Muslim lands, and they had a terrible job of converting Muslims, and they've it's well known that the missionary activity of people in Muslim lands was something that gave no fruit, and therefore this kind of this idea was thrown out by Westerners. I'm using it as a kind of wide term here. Western Christians who were in the game of converting. One of the most important kind of proponents of this would be Samuel Zwemer, who wrote a book about apostasy, and essentially it wasn't about apostasy, it was about why people are not converting to Christianity in Muslim lands. And his basic thrust was what? His excuse for all this money that they'd pumped in and not had any converts was that the really strict, archaic and barbaric laws of apostasy in Islam were the thing that were stopping us, meaning us as Christian missionaries, being able to convert and count these conversions. Now, that means that we have a very interesting discussion, which is not just about apostasy. We have to kind of get to the bottom of it, and therefore it's not a simple thing of saying, look, if somebody wants to become Muslim, let them become Muslim. If there's underlying reasons here, we have to take a step away from the kind of colonialized mentality and look at this issue from the perspective of Islamic law itself, clearly and specifically from the perspective of Islamic procedural law. And I think that will give you a much more kind
so
of.
Are we saying that if there is a case?
So don't say we are we saying. So are you saying? Say you, because I'm not telling you what to think.
Yeah. No. What I understand from what you're saying,
yes,
is that even if there is a legitimate Islamic ruling and that could be misused, that should be deferred, that should be thought of in a different way. So there is, Islamically, as I understand, no problem in someone changing the faith from whatever they believed in before to now becoming a Muslim, accepting the faith without kind of any prohibition of age, any age limit, gender limit, gender differentiation of any sort. So that's not the case. So because someone or a lobby has pointed out that this conversion may be misused, it is actually because it is there in a society because people are misusing minors into acceptance of this faith. Are we saying abrogation is allowed? Are we saying abrogation should be practiced, and Muslim scholars should look at the holistic picture and advocate not making this a law, or making this a law?
Yeah, it depends what you mean by abrogation. What do you mean by abrogation? Abrogation of
what I mean is that there is no. So there are 13 countries in which Muslim countries, at least 13 known countries documented, in which apostasy is a treason. Apostasy is deemed as penalty, the death penalty is there.
It's a penal. There's a penal punishment. It's not treachery. It carries the death penalty. Let's just say that
it carries the death penalty
in those countries. I'm not saying this is what it is, but I'm saying carries. Okay.
Yeah. So abrogation means that Muslim theology and the theology is very, very clear that there is no limit, there is no problem with someone accepting Islam. And
no, you're getting two things. I mean, you're getting two things conflating and mixing in two things. One is the laws about apostasy, quote unquote, which is what I talked about, Christian missionaries saying that the reason why we don't get converts is because Islam has this apostasy law that means that you're dead if you accept Christianity. That's a separate thing.
Yeah.
That essentially is on statute, and it's there probably as a remnant of, a reading of just the literal words of books of fiqh, not hadith, but books of fiqh. But, apostasy law still has relevance, because even if a Muslim state doesn't have that penal punishment, it will still have effects in terms of marriage. It will still have an effect in terms of inheritance, for example. It'll have ramifications. So changing your religion will have some kind of, say, monetary ramification. It'll have some kind of family ramification. Even if we say, okay, in the worst case scenario, a state which misapplies Islamic law says, well, it's a capital offense. But that's not essentially, there are two things, because there's a situation that, of a member of parliament saying we need to have a blanket ban on conversion. That is something different, because I would say, okay, let's go with that. Let's go. You're going from one extreme to another. And this is the interesting thing. The extremes that are being proposed here are, okay, because you have this misuse of power, therefore you all you do is you end up taking away a sane person's ability to accept faith. Now, why don't you do this? Which is, look at the situations in which a person converts and then verify at the age that they're in whether that is a conversion or a coercion. So is it conversion? Is it coercion? If it's coercion, it'll become clear. So say somebody wants to become Muslim, or somebody wants to, is this a problem that's to do with Islam, or is it to do with a problem of people becoming Hindus or Christians or Ahmadis, dare I say, in the subcontinent? So what's the problem? Is it Hindus becoming Muslims?
Yeah, Hindus becoming Muslims.
So that's the way that this is operating.
Yes. Although this bill has been proposed by a Christian MP, but it is the problem lies in probably majority Hindu area. They're still, although they're majority, but they are not as powerful as their Muslim counterparts. In that community. And hence there is.
So it's not a question of apostasy law, because the apostasy law kicks in when a Muslim would leave their faith, which is a completely different.
Yeah, which we'll talk about, I think, after the break. So we're going to go for a break in next maybe 3 to 4 minutes.
Yeah, so I think in that case, you're looking at the issue of, this is the big problem, I think, in Muslim countries, is that there has to be some kind of change in the way law is practiced and processed, which is what you look at when you look at procedural law. So you have the statute, you have the legal system. How does the legal system process a complaint? This is what's dysfunctional in the Muslim world, because if you have a complaint, you have to file a complaint, file a charge, and it gets mislaid or misplaced, and you have bribery, and you have all these things. That issue that you're talking about can be rectified very quickly by just saying to the child, which is like 14, 15, whatever, 16, possibly 17, come with a major, or come and explain your decision. And if the child, you're curtailing their human right. Let's just use a human right card here. If you do not allow the child to speak, or the adult to speak, depending on where you are. In Scotland, you can get married at 16, to be honest. There's an ulterior motive to the MP who's proposing this. It doesn't mean that there's no merit to the bill. Do you understand?
Okay. Yeah.
So just because it's a Christian proposing it, and it seems to be going against a person's right to become Muslim doesn't mean that there's not a backstory and a reason for this bill coming to play. If there's a problem, an intelligent Muslim scholar or politician would say, okay, let's sort out the problem so that they can't, in fact, use this religious card or this attack on religion, and just deal with it procedurally.
So, that seems to be very clear. So the way to solve it is that if you're a minor, you just wait until you're not a minor.
No. If you're a minor, if you're under 18, if this is the age you're proposing, ask them to go through a more specific process of stating their faith and verifying that there's no coercion. That's it. So there's no problem in that either.
So looking from an Islamic angle, there shouldn't be a problem if there is state intrusion into this process of conversion while you're under 18.
No, not really, because you're not saying, look, the conversion is not the person once they've converted. This is a theological issue, but Islam. Abu Hanifa mentioned this in Fiqh al-Akbar. He says that faith, iman, which is the thing that brings you into faith, is not iqrar, which is to testify in front of people and tell them that you're Muslim. The origin of faith is tasdeeq, which is for you to believe that you're Muslim. Do you understand? And the only point at which iqrar, which is to testify and tell people you're Muslim, is of any benefit is once you want to use the fact that you're Muslim to do something, such as get married, such as inherit from somebody, such as, for example, to go on Hajj. I don't know if Saudi Arabia has changed the legal system there, but or the kind of entry system for the haram. But in the past it did say you're only allowed in if you're a Muslim in certain parts of the country. And so, why not, if you're at an age under that, just, go through some processes that if you want some kind of usage out of your being Islam, then why don't we, in some way classify it and codify it in some way? There's nothing Islamically against that process. That's my point. My point is there's nothing that we should lose sleep over in putting those checks in place, because the reason why I'm saying all this is because it averts coercion, and it averts what we would call compulsion and oppression, al-zulm, because there may be cases, and there may be many cases, where people are pressurized into becoming Muslim due to marriage or other reasons. Due to those, there's nothing wrong with having a procedural thing in place. From the perspective of Islamic law, not at all. There's nothing in place that for me would say, no, you can't have something in place.
So if that reason is removed and there is enough evidence that part is taken care of, a Muslim activist should be advocating that there should not be any age limit.
Yeah, I mean, there can't be an age limit, because between them and God, there's no age limit. We're talking about the use of that for something that you need to have it on your identity card, or there's some kind of functional use to it. And for that functional use, you just need to you tick a couple of boxes. So go and meet your local officials, and they process the application. Like if you go on Hajj, I have people who convert to Islam and they want to go on Hajj, and they have to, even though they shouldn't, they have to kind of provide a form to the Ministry of Hajj and Umrah that they're Muslim, because they won't take, the passport says something that sounds not Muslim. And that's just no one's going to, jump up and say, Astaghfirullah, ya Al Saud. No one does that, because it's just a procedural thing. You're not questioning the person.
Islamicate conversation with your host Zubair Akram and my guest Sheikh Ridwan Muhammad. Discussion tonight is on forced conversion or conversion to Islam at an age which is not an adult age, and what does Islam say about it, and also the procedural issues which are around this criteria. A short ad break, and inshallah we'll be right back after this. Discussion will be on the other side of this, that if someone leaves Islam, what does Islam say about that?
The home of true traditional Pakistani food in Glasgow, original and still the best. 𝐤𝐴𝐺 Kebab House, 148 Calder Street, Glasgow. or call us on 0141 424 3722. याद करें यादगार.
स्ट्रॉबेरी गार्डन्स, बेहतरीन, खूबसूरत, सफाई बेमिसाल, आंखों को भाए, दिल में समा जाए.
Strawberry Gardens, 4th Street, Polkshields, Glasgow.
Okay, so Sheikh, so here's the case. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to this Islamicate conversation. So Sheikh, here's the thing. So we are, well, when I'm careful now when I say we are, so we are almost saying, we are saying there should not be even the age limit if you leave a religion and come into Islam. But then there is this issue: if you leave Islam, penalty is death. First of all, I want to know, is that correct? Is that how it is in Islam?
So say again, what did you say?
If you leave Islam and you go into any other religion, if you are tried in an Islamic court, why did you do that? The penalty, and if this is proven that this is the case, you are dead. You will be killed by the state.
Okay. So
First of all, I want to know if that's correct.
Yeah, so that issue, obviously, Ridda, there's a book, the whole chapter in fiqh that is called Kitab Ridda. It stems from what? It stems from an Ahad hadith, which is a solitary hadith in Sahih Bukhari, which I actually mentioned, in which Al-Bukhari relates to Ikrimah to his teacher Ibn Abbas, to the Prophet ﷺ, Man baddala dinahu faqtuluhu. So that hadith is interesting because it's sahih, it's authenticated. Literally means whoever changes their religion, kill them. Now, ascribed to the Prophet ﷺ. Now, the whole issue with that hadith is a couple of things that scholars mention. One of which is, if you take that literally, it doesn't say whoever leaves Islam, kill them. It means anybody who leaves any religion should be killed. Now, what do scholars say? Scholars say the literal meaning is not intended because of the fact that you cannot take the literal meaning because it makes no sense at all. In any perspective, it makes no sense. Because if a Christian becomes a Muslim, what do you have to do? It doesn't make any sense at all. And so they take it in the context of, the Quranic basic precept, which is la ikraha fi din, that there's no compulsion in religion. And the other aspect is the fact that what is meant by deen, and this is actually also related to what apostasy is in English. Apostasy means to renegade or to leave or to be treacherous in the kind of original language of Greek. And what that indicates is very close to what ridda and yartaddu in Arabic means, which is to turn your back on a community. And in this context, it does not mean a religious community per se. Religion is a very modern, people will be surprised I'm saying this, but because people are programmed to thinking this way, but religion is a very modern concept. Religion in the past was a way of binding people together. It was synonymous and almost one and the same with citizenship. And so your changing of religion was essentially changing of allegiance. And so what the Prophet ﷺ said in it's a sahih hadith. We're not discussing the fact it's not sahih or authenticated, but we essentially end up reading it as is whoever changes their allegiances, in brackets, in a context when the Prophet said this, which is, this is a big problem. You cannot take a hadith out of the context within which it was probably said, which was a context where somebody had switched allegiances from the friend to the enemy. Okay. And the Prophet said, Man baddala dinahu faqtuluhu. This is like an use in Arabic rhetoric, which is al-am yuradu bihi al-khas, which is a general statement by which something very specific is meant, which is a specific context. And only the people around the person would know what that specific context is. Now, what do? We say this is a general statement for general people. And this is why Imam as-Sarakhsi, rahimahullah, in his massive work Al-Mabsud, which is he wrote it in prison. I mean, Imam As-Sarakhsi was one of the greatest Hanafi scholars. He wrote it in prison, 15 years in prison. He commented on one of the books of Muhammad al-Shaybani, and what he wrote in that is that there's no set judgment for leaving your religion per se, religion meaning changing religion, not allegiance, because this is, he said, is something that is relegated, and its punishment is relegated to the hereafter. And he picked up on something very important, which is religion as religion, you know, in terms of I pray or I go to the church, is a private matter, and if it has no ramifications on public life, then it has no the state has no real interest in delving into a person's faith. And this again, this is Sahih Bukhari. Now, if you go to the next hadith, the other hadith that is on of relevance in this context is the hadith of Imam at-Tirmidhi, in which I think it's related by Ibn Mas'ud. Yeah, it must be. Yes, Ibn Mas'ud would have related this. And it's a famous hadith, actually. The reason I know it's Ibn Mas'ud is it's in the Arba'in as well, Imam Nawawi, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تحل دم امرئ مسلم إلا بإحدى الثلاثة, that the blood of a Muslim believer is not permitted to be spilt except in three cases. And one of them is المفارق لدينه المفارق للجماعة, التارك لدينه المفارق للجماعة, the person that leaves their religion, and the second part of it is and plies themselves away from the community.
So this is from Bukhari. This is Bukhari and Muslim. This is Bukhari and Muslim. This is Bukhari and Muslim, right?
So this the first one, which is man baddala dinahu faqtuluhu, is in Bukhari the most authenticated wording of the hadith about the three people whose blood is forfeit. The most authenticated, النفس بالنفس
والثيب الزاني
والثيب الزاني والتارك
والمفارق لدينه والتارك للجماعة.
المفارق للجماعة. So there's different wordings. The one I've mentioned is Imam Tirmidhi's, is probably the most closest to the intent. Now the person who leaves their religion is added on to another conditional clause, which is they pry themselves away from the community. And so apostasy, my point is, when apostasy was mentioned at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, which is ridda in Arabic, what that meant was essentially what I think was a Freudian slip, which is, you said, treachery. It means that basically this is a person that's joined the other side. In a situation, remember, we live in a context where we think the world has always been like this. And, even ideas of liberalism and things, these even, who's it, Mills, I think? Yeah, his book on liberty, I've got it somewhere here in the library. He's got a book on liberty, that's the title. Within it, he's talking about liberty. He's one of the founders of liberal philosophy. He says that liberalism doesn't make any sense until you got to a certain maturity in human society. So you cannot read it upon the past, because in the past, liberalism and freedom of choice and freedom of religion wouldn't have made any sense. But it does now. So he's thinking that, the world has evolved and human society has evolved. But in the past, what apostasy meant was essentially treason against the stability of the state within which you lived, or the tribal state within which you lived, or the city state within which you lived. And I think, if you don't look into it that way, you basically are butchering the Islamic tradition. You're really doing a disservice to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, because the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ are not supposed to be read at that superficial level. They're read to be read in a context with the Arabic language, with the kind of rhetorical force of the Arabic language. And I think that will be the way that you actually start to really make sense of what we're talking about.
But is it not the case that one could read this as we are almost apologists? Because Muslims don't have any power, there is no state which can enforce the punishment. So we're looking into things where, there is no place where Muslims will actually leave the society and make a difference, their community. Hence, there is no punishment. Why is it that the 13 odd countries still, and there is punishment of death if they leave the faith?
Why is it? I mean, it's in statute. Are you saying why is it there?
Yeah, why is it there? Why
Because
should
it's
why should a person be killed if they leave the faith that they have right now? And
I just said you don't. My whole point was that it is not a question of a person leaving their faith meaning that they should be killed, because that is a superficial reading of the prophetic injunctions on this.
But there is no other way of measuring anything. Why they have left. They have left. So full stop. Either they leave it because you're saying it's not because of the faith. They're leaving a community. They're leaving a state, which is no more the case. We're saying now we live in nation states. But what we're saying is it always equated to citizenship. So can someone be persecuted because or prosecuted if they leave the citizenship?
No, what I'm saying is if somebody commits treason, if somebody does something that is tantamount to treason today,
but
then
how is that treason? If someone leaves being British and they go in another country and get another passport,
ISIS. Look at the discussion that was taking place over ISIS, for example. And this discussion is not just Britain against ISIS. This is Jordan. This is Egypt. This is Syria. Any nation whose citizen went to fight for ISIS, the nation themselves suspended the nationality of that person and considered it, if they were fighting. You know that situation with the Jordanian pilot was.
So what we're saying is that there are prerequisites. If you are in an action against the state, then state takes action.
Yeah, I mean, because that's when it becomes clear. I mean, in the context of life as it is now, it's not the same as it was in the past. So if you switched allegiance, to understand this, you have to understand how societies worked. Now, if you weren't part of a tribe in the past, you're dead. You have. I mean, think about it. Before nation states, if you didn't have a tribe to protect you, how long would you survive?
So the whole Islamic law is unquestionable, isn't it? So you have to look at the context, and the context has changed. Now we're living in nation states, so everything that's to do with with the backdrop of a nation state or of a state, then that has to be reviewed and that has to be reinterpreted. Hence, the call for reformation.
Yes, I mean to one degree, yes, but that's not a fundamental upheaval of Islamic law. That's just, it's keeping in step with the way that societies order themselves. And then you look and see whether the ordering of societies today is fundamentally opposed to, something that is core to Islamic belief. And that's where there's no reformation. That's where there's no revision. But if it's to do with something that is tertiary or secondary, which actually fulfills the general needs of Muslim society, and this is what 𝐉𝐨𝐲 𝐙𝐻𝐫 rahimahullah passed away, I think it was last year, may Allah grant him paradise, one of the great Syrian scholars, he said that the international system of nation states actually fulfills a lot of the obligations and a lot of the requirements of Islamic law, and that's extremely important. I think that the nation states allow people to, and this should be the case, they allow them to have freedom of consciousness, they have them allow them to have access to their faith system. So I think there are aspects, I think, that we can use in terms of modern laws, which allow us to just slightly revise our systems.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this what I'm hearing is that apostasy. So Muslims leaving their, it's a big issue here in Pakistan and probably in Saudi Arabia and Iran, the three religious states. If you, what I'm hearing from you, these laws should be looked at even in these states. Am I right in understanding that?
Yeah, I think that's generally my point. I do think it's more complicated. We don't have to make it more complicated than it is, to be honest. I don't think Islamic law is that backward and complicated to be impractical, I think, for today's society. And this is not fundamental change. It's a review of how Islam is applied, and you do it so that you preserve the basic principles, the basic universals of Islamic law, such as protecting life and dignity, honor, wealth, intellect. The basic things, which is people's honor and dignity. So if it fulfills the basic, principles and universals of Islamic law, then why not? So I don't think this is something that Muslims need to worry about. It's actually something that I think, personally, Muslims should embrace.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. This is Islamicate Conversation, and I think we will leave today's program on a slightly lighter note as well. That Pakistan, Turkey, along with other 16 countries, are off the red list, entering into UK. And I think there is a lot of commotion around that, where people, hundreds and hundreds of families, probably thousands of families, stranded almost in these countries for last many months, are now able to travel back and forth. 4th of October is when the actual system changes. It's not going to be red, amber, or green. It will be either you are red or green. But for just now, if you're vaccinated, you're able to travel into UK from Pakistan and from Turkey. On that note, Sheikh, are we traveling back to Istanbul at some point, now that it is green? Or are you going to be staying mostly in Glasgow? I think we've lost Sheikh Rizwan. We have? We've lost Sheikh Rizwan? Yes. I think we've lost the connection with Sheikh Rizwan. So yes, I think we lost the connection. We're back. So Sheikh, yes. Yeah. So this travel, post-COVID travel, has been restored. You feel strange not having a mask on and not having the social distance. Almost is become part of you just now. Sheikh, how do you see this world now operating after this COVID? I just want to have your view on that. Why, what differences do you see after this whole situation of COVID now subsiding almost? People are traveling, people are coming back into the norm, but the economy has changed. How people understand faith has changed. People still kind of dying of it, but not to that extent what it used to be. Where do you see the world going after this?
That's a kind of it's way beyond my pay scale. Where do I see the world going after this? If anybody could answer the question, I think they'd be very, very well placed to advise world governments, because there's been seismic shifts in people's behavior. And I've noticed this because we had our courses, syllabus courses, running for 11 years on the ground and up and down the country in universities, very well attended, and we had to move on to online teaching, and even this year. And the amount of people that are able to now access the courses and benefit from them, we had students from Pakistan, Qatar, America, in Africa, people that never were able to access. We had people in Glasgow that could never attend the class in Glasgow attending the class online, and the access was amazing. But there is, a change in people's behavior. I've seen it in people attending mosques. I've seen it in people attending classes. I've seen a different way that people, the interpersonal relations that people have and the way that people greet and meet. This is going to leave a sizable mark in the way that people, behave generally, I think, because 1 year has created a habit in lots of different things that we, I think, as a community, a Muslim community, have to, I think, probably, wake up to that. We have to, especially mosques and institutions and religious organizations, have to realize that there's a massive change in the behavior of the people that they hope to reach out to and help. So mosques and the people that pray in them, and religious organizations and institutions that teach, and the people that they teach. We do have to, go back to the drawing board in many ways, and also look at what are people's interests, what are people's needs, what is the weakness that people feel at this moment in time, and how can we perhaps reach out to them and help them, and hope to mitigate some of the problems that have come to the fore in the kind of COVID age, because it's not going away. I mean, everybody's talking about that. It's not going away.
So people's emotional needs have changed. The way they relate to faith has changed, and I think there is a lot of way. I'm in print industry, and I'm looking at this from the business point of view. How online resources are replacing the print materials, and how the industry is changing. Then there is packaging needs that are getting changed from what it used to be, 2 months or maybe 6 weeks of container movement across the oceans is now gone to about 3 to 4 months. And the whole marine industry has changed. The whole, your flights have changed the way they operated. So all of this, from your reading of history, is this the longest pandemic that has existed in Islam, in human history?
I mean, not in my reading of Islam. I wasn't around, when the longest plague. The longest plague actually was, I believe it was the plague of Justinian, which obviously by the name, it predates the plague of Amwas, which killed, different estimates have different numbers, but 20,000 of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. So that plague of Amwas was actually a cycle of the plagues of the Justinian plagues. And you know how long is between them? I think there's about 3 centuries between them. So, this is a blip in terms of plagues, and that wasn't a respiratory problem. That was which this is actually much more pernicious, I think, much more difficult to deal with, because it is an airborne respiratory problem, and the previous plagues generally were not of that nature. And so you have historical data on that. It's well known how that worked and how people ended up kind of dealing with that. There wasn't the kind of thing that we have now. In fact, we have we have documents from the Ottoman period of vaccinations that allowed people to travel from one place to another, because they had been issued with vaccinations by the Ottoman Empire, during the 19th century, I believe. And so there's always been, health scares. There's always been mitigating circumstances. There's always been things put in place to try and mitigate the spread of disease. I think what we are dealing with now is something completely different, which is that disease is inexplicably linked with economy, with health, with governmental crackdowns on people's freedoms, on a kind of complete change of how the economy works. And as you said, like things like packaging, things like cargo crates and container container ships, how they move. All these things are changing completely from what they were like in the past. And I think from our perspective, in terms of religion, more people will get their knowledge, even more than before, from digital sources, and that just amplifies the problem we have, which is, the hadith we talked about. If you can misunderstand it sitting with a teacher, I guarantee you'll misunderstand it even more if you're watching on YouTube. Because hadith seems to be,
you don't have human connection.
Not just that, but just how clear the language is, because your teacher should be able to tell you that whoever said, the Prophet said, whoever changes their religion, kill them. your teacher should be able to tell you right as soon as they catch their breath that is not taken literally. Now, you'll have people online who will look at that hadith and give an hour lecture on it without even mentioning that at all. And then what you're left with is, with some strange interpretation such as, oh, well, if you became Muslim, you should have known that that's the problem. If you leave it, you can come in, but you can't go. It's almost like, there's a song, I can't remember what it is, the Eagles, Hotel California or whatever it is. It's ringing in my mind for some reason. You can check in, but you can never leave or something like that. So they come up with fantastic explanations of the hadith saying, yes, it's true that, there's no compulsion in religion until you become Muslim, and then there's compulsion. It doesn't make any, sorry, that is pretty stupid. Because it makes a mockery of our faith from one perspective, and it makes a mockery of our scholarship, if that's how you think it works.
I think people who are on our Facebook and on our radio will be looking forward to your comments on what you would like to have included in this Islamicate conversation for next week. Until then, inshallah, we'll leave you with our sponsors' messages, and also inshallah, I am hoping next week both Sheikh Rizwan and I will be in a studio which is in the same city, having Islamicate conversation. Until then, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam.